mentioned before, there's areas of the direct engagement with the readers. So then I'm trying to think, well, what is a monograph? And so some of the features that I think I wanted to pull out from a monograph, clearly this would never handle as a definition, but here are some features. It is a means of disseminating some research findings. And I guess it's got a sort of textual base to it. So there's some sort of way of disseminating one's research findings, primarily textual. You know, it's not a film. It could be a film. Maybe it should be a film as well. But there's a textual component to that. The monograph has been used up till now as a primary way of structuring research in the humanities. So while a journal article is quite often just writing up a result, a monograph for a lot of humanities scholars is actually the building block around which they conduct their research. And so it's got a bigger role here. It's sort of directing, informing the research. If what you can do with a monograph changes, then clearly the way that you can conduct your research changes as well. So there's a relationship here between the end product and your research process, which I think we'll come back to a little bit more. But there's an interaction there that we need to be engaged with, and what the role of the monograph is in that. It's a store of knowledge over time. I've got archiving there, but I think it's really important that a monograph or a book is holding knowledge. Both, it's a sort of an identity. This is what was said at this time, and people can come back to it 100 years later, 200 years later, 500 years later, and it's like a time capsule of an idea, of a thought, and it has survived in its entity as it was created. And I don't think one wants to ditch that as an important object, that we've got this, and I come down to the later one, that it's self-contained and portable, that there's something important in that you can put your idea, you can put those concepts together, and you can get hold of them in some way and say, look, that's an entity which is self-defining. I don't need to go to lots of other places to understand this entity, and I can carry it with me, and I can take it to places where I want to have it, rather than being constrained to going to it. And I think that those are issues that we want to be thinking about. It's also a means of discovering new research. So quite often people go to libraries and cruise the bookshelves and say, "Well, look what I found," or they're looking at Amazon's reading lists, or they're looking at even the references within to other identities. So it's a way of discovering material as well as just disseminating work. And again, that's something that I think we want to think about. And finally, since the beginning of the monograph, you've had different editions and formats for different readers. And so, you've always had these big, glossy formats that cost a huge amount, and you've had little paperbacks that you can flog off at railway stations. And there's been lots of things in between. So across time, different formats have been created to address different audiences. And that's also a facility that I don't think we probably want to ignore, and if anything, engage with even more. So I think we'd probably want to think of a digital monograph a little bit more than just a digitized edition of a printed work. Now, clearly that is something. But the potential of a digital monograph is much bigger than that, just as the potential of digital humanities is bigger than the digitization process. The potential here is that we've got a digital object which can do all that a paper monograph could do, and potentially a lot more. And maybe we should be looking, thinking about how we could engage with that. And so I've got open access there. Now, clearly, open access is not a requirement for a digital object. But I'd like to argue, and I'll keep going on, that I think that it's really an important part of the potential of this idea of a digital monograph is that it's open access. And the reasons for that is that I think that you get far better dissemination and discovery like that. You allow reuse and engagement, social engagement a lot more. You facilitate social editing. I think there's a lot of potential that open access can provide that a closed access is denying that immediacy with the text, which is a big loss, I think. It can be multimedia. One can embed digital media into, a video is no different to text, which is no different to a picture, which is no different to a three-dimensional cloud diagram that can spin and we can look at it from lots of different ways. These are all just digital objects which can be embedded into a digital object. So that's not a problem. We can also embed links. Links to data, which is great, links to websites, links to other resources that are available. There's a big difference between those two things, and it's all to do with whether or not your final digital object is self-contained or not. If you're linking to other places, then you have a real problem down the line of sustaining the integrity of the research. Because not only do you have to make sure that the place that you link to is sustained, but you also have to make sure that the link itself is sustained. And so there's a whole bunch of issues there about how do you maintain the integrity of the idea when you break it away from being a self-contained object. Now, lots of things can be done with that, and there'll be ways around that, but it's something that one needs to think about when one's talking about these, the integrity of the idea that you're putting forward, and whether people can really engage with your thesis in the way that you want them to. It can come out in many, many more formats. So it's not just hardback and paperback and big and small print. So here are some of the ways that at Open Book, some of the different formats that we generate as just part of the process. We have printed both hardback and paperback. We have PDFs, we have EPUBs, we have MOBIs, we have HTML, XML. Okay, I know XML includes lots of other stuff that is on the list. But we've got WordPress, we've got Wikitext, we've got Word, we've got InDesign, we've got a thing called Binu, which is used by one of the telephone book reader that we've got. We've got LaTeX. We heard about Wolfram was doing something at that Oxford, but Mathematica is there. We've got IPython. It's this huge array of different formats. And just as we heard earlier, these different formats all do different things. And they all give different potential. And so printed works are really great if you want to write notes in the margin, you want to do things, you want to bend it over. And lots of people like printed works. PDFs are good for lots of reasons that EPUBs aren't good for, and vice versa. Similarly, if you want to embed code in a program that runs, things like IPython and Mathematica are really good news for that. And so once again, there's lots and lots of different versions that can do different things, present different things to different audiences in different ways. And I think we can look as academics to engage with that positively and think, let's think of all the things, all the different people that we want to engage with and how to engage with them. And finally, there is something, possibly, maybe, with a question mark, about a linear structure about a monograph. That there's something that the author is leading the audience through the set of arguments. And a lot of the formats that I've said there, EPUB, MOBI, HTML, XML even, WordPress, have all got a structure to them. But it's not necessarily a unique structure. There's lots of different ways of reforming things and coming up with a new structure. And in the digital world, you can create a new edition. Now, whether you call that lots of different ways of going through the same content or lots of different contents, that sounds to me like a sort of definitional thing. Certainly, I can mix and match digital contents in lots and lots of different ways and recreate them in lots of different formats to be engaged in with different audiences. And that's something, again, that's a huge power that we have in our dissemination process that didn't exist before. Okay, so Better dissemination. Open access, the sort of digital monographs, I think, have got better dissemination. Broader geographic reach. Different reader demographic, I think. It's hard to know that, and we're trying to do a study, but I suspect that a lot of the people that are accessing our work are not from academic communities, and that they're coming through from interested non-academics. But I have no proof for that. We're trying to get that at present. And reuse. One of the things that, well, we'll come back to reuse. By having an open access, I think we are able to reuse the works in ways that give people a lot more flexibility. Okay, how does this all enable us to do better research? Clearly, the linking, being able to link the research directly to the repositories, being able to link directly to databases, being able to link back to archives, being able to, this is not embedding, this is just linking. This is just saying, listen, here's my thesis, but here is where the data comes from. Here's my thesis, here is where you can go to test that. That sort of interaction, I think, is something that a digital book can do really well. With the proviso, and the thing that we really have to think about in the future, is that those links need to be sustained for as long as the book is to really get the good value of that. So we really need to be thinking about how to ensure that. We can embed multimedia content. As I said before, it can be all sorts of things that we embed. We've got free range to embed music, and I'll quickly look at some examples of music and videos and things where we've done that. Social editing, by having an open access, we can allow social editing both pre-publication and post-publication. And both of those are interesting, different dynamics that one can think about with a monograph. And of course the reuse, different ways of doing things, different ways of negotiating one's way through the material, different research techniques as they're discovered, making sure that the material is accessible to allow the developments of different ways of interacting with them.